One of the hardest decisions we had to make as a family was either crossover or SUV. I'm not the only one with this kind of a conundrum.
What's a conundrum?
Exactly. Thanks to our Comparo tool, we can see that consumers just like yourselves are going through the same pains regardless of price difference. One such comparison that proves this is how on our platform, people are actually pitting this 4x4 Everest up against this, the Ford Territory. Now, to the unassuming eye, to the untrained eye, it's really a no-brainer because this, after all, is ₱1,000,000 Philippine pesos more affordable than this automobile. But see, right then and there, you're missing the point. The customer is already set on getting a Ford and everything that comes with it. What I want to know now is just exactly who, what, and how they're going to transport everything that they want to inside these automobiles. And that is what we're going to get down to on this episode of Behind the Wheel. Okay, wait. This is not going to be the Comparo that you're mostly used to, where we're pitting the two cars up against one another. We're actually doing this so we can find out which of the two will actually be best for you. Hey, that rhymes. I knew that. I'm a poet, and I knew it. Anyway, if you whip out the AutoDeal app, you will see that the Territory Titanium X comes in at 1,599,000 Philippine pesos, while the Everest 4x4 Titanium comes in at 2,525,000 Philippine pesos. So comparing them in this regard would be like comparing apples to oranges. Dude, you had one job. So really, what gives? When my wife and I were having problems trying to figure out whether we would get a crossover or an SUV, we, as you'll probably know, obviously opted for the latter, which we have a video of my Montero up against an Okavango. The links are somewhere down below. Now, we chose the SUV because, well, the kids were much younger at that point, and anybody knows children come with a lot of bags. Not baggage, bags. And then every so often, more often than not really, the grandparents would come along too. So space was a premium. We wanted to make sure that everybody was coming along to wherever it is that we were going. Now, however, the kids have grown up a little bit. They don't carry as much stuff, and more often than not, it's just the four of us. The grandparents don't come with us as often anymore. So now we're looking towards something a bit more comfortable. The difference between the two is basically how many and how you transport said apples and oranges. I've gone too far, haven't I? Here, let me show you. Inside the Territory, you will find a 1.5-liter turbocharged gasoline engine, that's an EcoBoost by the way, that produces 158 horses and 258 newton-meters of torque. That's a good amount of torque for a 1.5-liter. Now, the advantage of a gasoline engine, obviously, is that, well, it's much smoother. No matter what you say, however clean or however comfortable the diesel engine will be, a gasoline engine in this field will always be much more smoother. The downside is obviously you don't have as much torque as you would have in a diesel engine, but I can guarantee you that unlike a diesel engine, you'll never have to worry about black smoke coming out of your tailpipe. Unless, of course, there's like a catastrophic meltdown of some sort.
Because you can see the flames at the rear of that car. He stopped it, it's off the track.
Of all the clips in all the world, of all the millions of videos that you will find on YouTube, you guys choose that one. In the Everest, oh my God, why doesn't this car have struts? Didn't the previous model have struts? Why doesn't this have struts anymore? Anyway, I'm itching and moaning. In the Everest, you've got yourself a 2-liter bi-turbo diesel engine that produces 207 horses and 500 newton-meters of torque. Now, the advantage, obviously, that the diesel engine has is twice the amount of torque. So when you step on this automobile, it just goes everywhere that you want it to do. And you might argue that it's actually more fuel efficient. We'll get to that a little bit later. But first, the fact that this is a more powerful engine doesn't necessarily mean it's a more smoother engine. Since it's a diesel, you might feel some knocking here and there, much more vibrations that you would in the gasoline engine. So this, the trade-off is, although it's more powerful, obviously there's just much more vibrations inside the automobile. Now, when we got the Montero, the prices of diesel and gasoline were actually pretty far apart. Diesel was much, much more affordable. Today, however, they're actually much closer to one another. Every once in a while, you'll see that the diesel actually is more expensive than gas on rare occasions. But what I'm getting at is that in that case, if you're talking about diesel and gas, if that's your main reason, that thing's out the door. And then if fuel efficiency is also your reason between choosing two, that's out the door as well because, well, inside the city, the Territory does about 10 kilometers per liter. The 4x4 Everest, 8.5. Kind of big. But when you switch around and hit the highway, this does 14.5 kilometers per liter, while this does 16 kilometers per liter. Much better legs. So really, in that regard, it's null and void. What you want to try and figure out here is whether you want something that's peaceful or you want something that's powerful. Can't really have both, but if you're choosing between the two, that's exactly what you're going to be tossing up. Now, I will tell you what it is that I prefer at the end of this video. But the next thing that I want to show you, and I'm sure is very, very important, is cargo space. A major factor is definitely going to be cargo space. One of the things that my wife and I really wanted to keep our eye on because we know just exactly how much, again, bags children come with. Now, for instance, in a 7-seater SUV, such as the Everest, with 7 seats in play, you're looking at roughly about 259 liters of space. Not much, but enough for these 2 carry-on luggages. So no issues there. And a little bit more space can be found underneath a small cubby hole that can hold odd items, as we've proven there. A little bit of a flex here. This is power. The third row is powered, which then will give you enough space for 2 balikbayan boxes, 2 carry-on luggages, and a regular-sized luggage as well. So that's really a great amount of space already. But then if you even want to go further, when you maximize it, you're looking at over 1,800 liters of space, which is like 6 balikbayan boxes and 2 carry-on luggages. That's quite a lot of space. Now, if you're thinking that the 7-seater SUV has got the crossover licked, not exactly licked, but it's close. It's closer than you think. See, in terms of space, yes, maybe. But when you're loading things into either the Everest or the Territory, it's got almost the same flat lip. And then in this case, in the Territory, it's actually lower. So putting heavier items and sliding them in would be much easier inside this automobile. By the way, you're looking at almost 460 liters of space, which is really good enough for a full set of luggage for 4 people going on a trip, or perhaps 2 balikbayan boxes and, well, some overnight baggage as well. If you were to fold the second row, and mind you, it only has a second row to fold because it doesn't have 7 seats, obviously, you're looking at roughly over 1,000 liters of space. And when you do that, you can fit 4 balikbayan boxes and a set of carry-on luggages. But there is a bit of a problem there. Now, while it is lower and easier to load stuff in, when you fold the second row, there is a lip. So when you're loading heavier items, that's going to be a problem, and that could spell the difference between a good day and a bad back. Okay, just checking. And now at this point, I'd like to talk about creature comforts inside the automobile. Now, if your initial thought was that the Everest has got a leg up, most definitely a leg up on the titanium Territory, then yeah, you're probably right there. Because here in the Everest, you'll find that there are air controls found here in the bottom. You've got 2 USB charging points, Type A and Type C. You've got even a outlet for you there. You've got a center armrest with 2 cup holders. And then for the third row in the back, you've got a charging point in the form of a 12-volt socket, and then another one essentially at the very rear, which the third row can still use. Now, creature comforts, most definitely yes, But I feel that the passenger comfort might actually be better in the crossover because here it's still essentially a bench. It's very flat. It's not as if that you're sinking into the seat itself and you can't call it your own kind of a thing. It feels like it's very much shared because it's flat and there's barely any bolstering. Also, the seat material, leather, mind you, but this is an older automobile. This test unit's got about 17,000 kilometers on it, and the leather, well, just isn't aging as well as I wanted it to. It feels like it's getting shiny and a little bit slippery at the same time. Let's also consider the fact that this, like mentioned earlier, does have 7 seats, so you've got a lot of space for more passengers in you. But I gotta tell you that if you're going to use the 7 seats in here and maximize the automobile, it's most definitely good for when the kids are still much younger, much smaller, much kako-sized. So when you take the grandparents along for a ride, they're definitely going to be in the second row, whereas the kids or smaller persons like myself are relegated to the back. Like when Lisa drives, and Antonio sits up front, and I'm at the back. Nice. Oh, and then speaking of ingress and egress, to make things a lot easier for the senior, it would be better if you could get your butt closer to the seat as quickly as possible. But since there's a larger gap between the outside of the automobile and to the seat, that might give the senior a harder time. Great, though, that there is a grab handle and a step board. But again, to lift your cheek up is a little bit more taxing than if you were just simply to slide your cheek in.
What?
The butt cheek.
Okay.
What cheek did you think I was talking about, Jack? In the territory, no grab handle to help any seniors out, but getting in and out is no issue whatsoever because the car is much lower and you also don't have a step board that gets in the way and makes the gap between the street and your butt cheek to the chair much wider. It's much skinnier. Kind of like my butt compared to Jack's butt.
Wow.
I'm saying that you have a nice butt, Jack.
Thank you.
So, inside the automobile, space, ridiculous amounts of space. I know that the Everest has a lot of space, but look at the amount of space that you have here inside the territory. That's my normal driving position, but even if it was Jack driving, that'd be like a good 6 to 7 inches. Amazing. No center tunnel, so that means you can fit 5 people in here possibly, or rather easily without any issues. Obviously 7 in the Everest, but here comfortably 5. It's also much brighter in here because the headliner is a lighter color and the leather inside the automobile also has accents on it to brighten up the entire car, as well as the doors as well. They're of a different color. The leather, made a mistake, it's actually the same as the Everest. It's just that here it's brighter because it does have accent pieces. If you feel, or rather I did mention, not if you feel, I did mention earlier that the Everest has got creature comforts that outdo the territory, and I was right because here you only have 2 air vents found up front instead of the Everest, which are found up on top, which I believe is much nicer and can cool the cabin a lot faster. You don't have any air controls here, and you only have 1 charging point in the form of a USB Type A. You do have a center armrest with 2 cup holders and bottle holders on either door, but essentially that's basically it. So again, to wrap things up, the big difference between comfort for the rear passengers is that if you're in the Everest, you've got power, like as we mentioned earlier at the beginning of the program. Power, so it's got more utility to it, and it's much darker, it just feels much rougher. Here you have a bit more peacefulness, really, a bit more plush, a little bit more room, less people, but you know, with the people that it has inside the automobile, kind of takes care of them a little bit more. I don't necessarily have a dog in this fight. I'm just bringing these cars to you as options. But if you guys are actually thinking that you want to favor the Everest because it has 7 seats, we put out a poll on Instagram not too long ago to ask those with 7-seater SUVs, how often is it do you use those 7 seats? Do you use it like once a month or less? I actually have used my 7 seats all of twice this year, and in the poll, only 45% of the people that took it used the 7 seats more than once a month. There's food for thought. Now, when it comes to the tech and features for the driver, on paper, it is arguable that they are pretty much the same. To say that they both have digital instrument clusters and they both have large infotainment screens, and they both carry the same advanced driver aid systems. But we will say, because of experience, that the execution inside the Everest is a little bit better. They both have wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. They both have wireless charging, and they both have screens that are large, and they give you a really, really good view with your 360-degree view camera. But although I do prefer the screen inside the territory because it's placed in a horizontal position, and I believe that the eyes can easily focus on that much better than it is a vertical screen. In this particular screen, however, the most of the functions that you need to look at are on the top half of the screen, while the bottom half are for your car functions. And when I say execute better here, it's because you have physical controls for your air and your audio, wherein inside the territory, all of those controls are actually found inside the system. And that does get kind of, well, taxing because you need to get to that first. You need to start the car and whatnot to get to it. Here, it's just push, turn, and you're good as gold. Now, speaking of the advanced driver assist systems, or the ADAS, both of them do carry this system, but I feel as if that inside the Everest, it actually works better because, well, it's much smoother. It's, I don't know, engineered in such a manner or programmed in such a manner that when you're stuck in traffic, it works much, much better inside this larger vehicle than it does inside the territory. I'm not picking favorites here. This is fact, and this is through our tests that we do on the road. For instance, this isn't as, let's say, for example, temperamental when it comes to traffic and other surrounding vehicles that pass you by. Whereas in the territory, some little thing that passes you by and all of a sudden all the systems go, wah! This also being a bigger car, it also has more storage space, which is yet another thing to consider. You've got very large door cards, so large in fact that you can, if I can get to it, you can fit even Jack's large bottle on the door without any issues whatsoever. Then you've got a large glove box. Above that, you've got more space, really. And then you've got a huge box in the middle that, dude, we're starting to look like the produce section of Unimart, really. Meanwhile, in the territory, there is a large compartment underneath the shifter where you can put things like Jack's bottle. Unfortunately, the door cards aren't big enough to hold his bottle himself, and then you don't have the extra little cubby holes that you will find inside the Everest. We now move on to what I feel is the biggest deciding factor when you're choosing between these two cars. Sans the price, of course, which is just exactly how it drives and how comfortable it is for your passengers, or your apples and oranges, or in this case, I'm just gonna say it, your lemons or your kiwis. We couldn't get apples or oranges. It's much cheaper. Do you know how expensive a kiwi is? When you first set off in the Everest, those 500 Newton meters of torque really, really get felt. Because whether you're taking off from a standing still position or you're overtaking on the highway, wow, 500 Newton meters properly put in on a conventional automatic transmission feels really, really good. There's definitely that pull or push, mind you, when you pin the throttle to the floor. You've got, oh yeah, you've got 500 Newton meters of torque actually, and you will feel the power in more ways than one. There's the push or pull, depending on how it is that you want to say it, and then there's also the noise that comes from the engine and the vibrations too, which really isn't uncommon for a diesel engine SUV, but it is quite far off from what you'd feel in a crossover. And yet another thing that you may need to contend with, if you will allow me to say, is the sheer size of the automobile. The height, the width, the length. Now, obviously on the highway, that's not going to be an issue. But when you're talking about the tight streets of the city, perhaps tighter streets of subdivisions, yeah, then it might actually become, well, no naman a hassle, but just something that you won't be contending with if you were driving a crossover. As a passenger in the second seat inside an SUV, there are two things that I want to point out. Number one is that you feel very safe and secure inside this car because of its large girth and the height and the small windows and the fact that you feel like, and it sounds like you're inside a tank. It feels very secure. The second, however, is that because it is an SUV, it's got somewhat of a wafty feel to it. If you see my head, it's sort of like bobbing left and right, and that is, well, something that you will find is a characteristic of most ladder frame SUVs. And that is something that you may definitely need to get accustomed to as a passenger of this vehicle, whether it's your kids that are here in the back or you yourself are back here with your kids driving and whatnot. So those are the two things that you may want to understand just before you hop into this vehicle. But I will give it to this car for creature comforts because, again, as we pointed out, I've got everything that I need back here. I've got bottle holders, I've got air vent controls, I've got USB charging points. I could plug an iron back here if I wanted to. Why would I plug an iron? Oh wait, I've done that in a video. Inside the Territory, it's very different. You feel much more relaxed, and really it feels like there's a lot more light coming in because, as we mentioned, the materials and the colors in here are much brighter. So it feels like you're engaging with the outside a bit more. You don't feel as closed in as you would inside the Everest. As a passenger, it definitely feels much more grounded. It doesn't feel so wafty like you would feel inside the Everest. It feels like it's more stable, and really the suspension is so much better that, well, seniors and grumpy individuals like myself will really enjoy the ride a bit more. I will have some complaints though. Like the first would be is that the seat tends to lean back a little bit too much to my liking. I would like to adjust it. Unfortunately, there is only one setting. And the second is, I might be nitpicking here, but I did kind of enjoy the air coming down from above inside the Everest than here inside the Territory where it comes from down below. And also, there is only one USB charging point where I might have to fight with my passenger as to who gets it. But then again, like I said, I might just be nitpicking here. Now, although in totality, the Everest most definitely has more space, and we've proven that, the space here inside the Territory is redonkulous. You really have lots of legroom. The width is almost, it feels like it's the same because of all the room that you have. There is no center tunnels, so fitting a third passenger in here won't be as difficult as it would be inside the Everest. Driving the Territory, gotta be said, it is most definitely peaceful. It's much calmer. It feels more refined. It's quieter too. It's smaller, so it's easier whether you're inside the city or out on the highway. It's still stable even for its size. And if, let's say, for example, you're a beginner driver, much easier to start with a smaller automobile than it is a bigger one, isn't it? The quietness obviously is unmatched. You're talking literally apples and oranges because inside this automobile, you've got a gasoline engine, and inside the Everest, you've got a diesel. So there's much less knocking, much less noise inside this car. However, there is a downside to that. This does have a lot of torque. We've shown you that. But the problem is the transmission of this automobile isn't as good as the transmission of the Everest. The Everest, as I mentioned, it's got your standard automatic transmission. In here, well, Ford likes to call it a 7-speed automatic, which to you and I is basically just a DCT. Now, as DCTs go, it's not as great or as good as the other DCTs that we've driven out there, which is to say that it can get a bit jumpy. So there is a bit of a learning curve when you jump inside this automobile. It's not something that's gonna take you a week to learn. No, 2-3 days tops and you'd be good. It's just that, again, you can't compare it to an automatic or a traditional automatic transmission, which is what you get inside the Everest. So with ease of driving in that particular aspect, yeah, I might give it to the Everest. Really, the difference is night and day. I know that the Everest is one of the calmer, quieter, if you can call it that, SUVs that you have in the market that carry a diesel engine, but really, no way can you compare it or make it even come close to what a crossover with a gasoline engine can deliver. It's just quieter, smoother, calmer. I feel at ease. It's like Jack wasn't late for a shoot.
Wow, I was the first one to arrive at the venue today.
Oh yeah, that's right. Sorry, I was late today. Maybe we scratch that. For a more comprehensive and detailed review of each of these automobiles, well, we don't have the top-of-the-line models, but we do have the lower spec variants available on our YouTube channel, which I'm sure we provided the links down below in the description. Differences or not, opinions or facts, it's still going to be difficult to put these two cars together and try to figure out which one I personally would take home. But hey, a review's a review and a promise is a promise, so let's get at it. Which one would it be? What car should I get? Should I get an SUV or a crossover? My immediate response will be, let's figure out exactly what it is that you need. Let's prioritize your needs over your wants to make sure that the car works for you and not the other way around. Let's look at a couple of scenarios. Do you have a family or plan to start one? Do you have a large number of people in your family that you need to get them inside one automobile and take them wherever it is that you need to go? Then maybe this is where you need to lean. Or are you perhaps closer to the other end of the spectrum, where your kids could be much older now and you don't necessarily need all that space in the back? The 7 seats is not as important. Perhaps you're independent and you just want to pamper yourself with a really softer ride. Then perhaps the Territory is closer to what it is that you need. Hopefully this video has given you a deeper insight as to what these cars can offer you in whatever particular time of your life that you are. Because really, that choice will matter not just to you, but everybody else that's inside the automobile. And when you're ready, head on over to AutoDeal.com.ph, try our Get Quote button because it'll bring you that much closer to your next, well, I don't know which one.